Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. 3 years of silence shattered in a single heartbeat, the moment the heavy oak doors of the audition room slammed shut behind him. Julian Vane froze, his breath hitching in a throat suddenly gone dry, as the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain assaulted his senses, a scent that had haunted his nightmares and his most shameful fantasies for 1,095 days. There was no escape. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on, vibrating with a predatory stillness that Julian recognized instantly. He didn't need to look up to know who was sitting in the shadows of the director's chair, but when he did, the gaze that met his was not the lens of a camera, it was the barrel of a gun. "You're late," the voice rumbled, a deep baritone that scraped against Julian's nerves like velvet over raw skin. "But then again, you always did have a talent for making an exit, didn't you, Julian?" Cashin Riker. The name alone was enough to command the attention of half the globe, a titan of the silver screen, a man sculpted from marble and malice. He sat with his legs crossed, a script resting casually on his knee, looking every inch the emperor he had once played. But this wasn't a movie set. This was the trap Julian had walked into, and the steel in Cashin's eyes told him there would be no running away this time. To understand the terror that seized Julian's heart, one had to rewind 3 years, to the humid, suffocating summer they spent filming The Crown of Thorns. It was the period drama that had swept the award season, a masterpiece of tragedy and betrayal. Cashin had played King Alaric, the ruthless usurper. Julian had been Prince Elian, the delicate, defiant heir forced into servitude. It was supposed to be just a job. Julian was a method actor, known for his ability to dissolve into his characters until the person named Julian Vane ceased to exist. He prided himself on that total immersion. It was his armor. But with Cashin, the armor hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated. They had spent 4 months in isolation on a remote location in the Scottish Highlands. The script demanded intimacy, brutal, psychological, and physical. The dynamic between King Alaric and Prince Elian was built on a knife's edge of hatred and obsessive lust. The director, a visionary with a sadistic streak, had encouraged them to remain in character even when the cameras stopped rolling. "Don't speak to me as Julian," Cashin had whispered one night in the trailer, wiping fake blood from Julian's lip with a thumb that lingered too long. "Speak to me as him. Tell me you hate me." "I hate you," Julian had breathed, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. But his eyes had betrayed him. His body, leaning involuntarily into Cashin's touch, had betrayed him. The line between the script and the soul began to blur. When Cashin looked at him, was it Alaric possessively eyeing his prize, or was it Cashin looking at Julian? When they rehearsed the scene where the king breaks the prince's spirit, the tears streaming down Julian's face were not summoned by technique. They were born of a terrifying realization. He was falling in love with a man who was only pretending. The breaking point came on the final day of shooting. The wrap party was in full swing, champagne flowing, the crew celebrating their inevitable success. Julian had found himself cornered on the balcony, the cold wind whipping his hair. Cashin had followed him out. The air between them was electric, charged with the residue of the intense emotional warfare they had enacted for months. "It's over," Cashin had said, his voice devoid of the king's accent, yet retaining the king's authority. "You can stop trembling now, Julian. The cameras are off." "I know." Julian had lied, gripping the railing. "Do you?" Cashin had stepped closer, invading his personal space, radiating heat. "Because the way you look at me, it suggests you've forgotten where the script ends." He had reached out, his hand brushing Julian's cheek. "Or perhaps you wanted to continue?" In that moment, Julian saw his own destruction. If he stayed, if he let Cashin kiss him, and he knew, with a jolt of electricity, that Cashin was going to kiss him, he would never recover when Cashin inevitably moved on to the next role, the next co-star, the next obsession. To Cashin, this was likely just part of the process, a way to decompress from the role. To Julian, it was a life sentence. So he ran. He didn't just leave the party, he left the country. He fired his agent, changed his number, and vanished into the obscure world of European indie theater. He took unglamorous roles in languages he barely spoke, desperate to scrub the feeling of Cashin's hands from his skin. He became a ghost, haunting small stages, convinced he had successfully severed the tie. But the industry was a small world, and obsession was a powerful gravity. Now, 3 years later, standing in the dimly lit audition room in London, Julian realized the tie had never been severed. It had only been stretched taut, waiting to snap him back. "I didn't know you were casting for this project," Julian said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his hands were trembling in his pockets. He had been told this was a low-budget noir thriller, a project by an up-and-coming director who admired his stage work. He hadn't known the production company was Riker Films. "I'm not just casting," Cashin said, standing up. He was taller than Julian remembered, broader. Time had not softened him. It had sharpened his edges. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Julian's annual rent, the collar unbuttoned to reveal the hollow of his throat. "I wrote it." Julian blinked. "You wrote it?" "I needed a muse," Cashin said dryly, walking slowly around the table, circling Julian like a shark testing the water. "Or perhaps an exorcism. It's amazing what 3 years of silence can do to a man's creativity." He stopped directly in front of Julian. The distance between them was less than a foot. Julian could smell the coffee on his breath, see the faint, sleepless shadows under his eyes. "Why are you here, Julian?" "I need the work," Julian answered honestly. The indie circuit paid in artistic fulfillment, not currency, and his mother's medical bills were mounting. "I was told the role was perfect for me." "It is." Cashin shoved the script into Julian's chest. "Read page 4. Scene 2. Julian took the script. His fingers brushed Cashin's, and a shockwave went up his arm. He opened the pages, his eyes scanning the lines. The characters were named Adrian and Silas. Adrian was a detective. Silas was the criminal who had slipped through his fingers years ago. Asterisk Silas. "Why did you hunt me down?" "It's been years." "The case is cold." Asterisk. Asterisk Adrian. "The case is never cold until I say it is." "You took something that belonged to me." Asterisk. Silas. "I took nothing." Adrian. "You took yourself." Julian's breath hitched. He looked up, his eyes wide. "This." "Read it," Cashin commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Read the lines, Julian. Do what you do best. Become him." Julian swallowed hard. He fell back on his training, the only safety net he had. He straightened his spine, adopting the wary, cornered stance of the character, Silas. When he spoke, his voice was different, lighter, mocking, hiding fear. "I took nothing," Julian read, injecting a tremor of defiance into the words. "You took yourself," Cashin replied instantly, not looking at the script. He knew the lines by heart. He stepped closer, backing Julian against the wall of the soundproof room. "You vanished into the night without a word. Without a goodbye. It was necessary," Julian ad-libbed, channeling Silas, or perhaps channeling himself. "To survive." "To survive what?" Cashin slammed his hand against the wall beside Julian's head. The loud bang made Julian flinch, dropping the script. "To survive the truth?" "That you felt it too." "Cut." Julian gasped, breaking character. He tried to duck under Cashin's arm, but Cashin was faster. He caught Julian's wrist, pinning him against the acoustic foam. "We aren't filming, Julian," Cashin snarled, his mask of indifference finally cracking to reveal a blazing furnace of anger beneath. "There are no cameras here. No director. Just you and me and the 3 years of hell you left me in." "I left you in hell." Julian laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "You were the king of the world, Cashin. You won the Oscar. You had everything. I had nothing." Cashin roared, the sound echoing in the small room. He pressed his body against Julian's, the contact searing. "I woke up the morning after the wrap party to find my bed empty and your number disconnected. Do you have any idea what that does to a man who had just spent 4 months pouring his soul into yours?" "It was a role," Julian shouted back, tears pricking his eyes. "It was the method. You didn't want me. You wanted Elian. You wanted the submission, the control. You idiot," Cashin hissed. He released Julian's wrist only to grab his face with both hands, forcing Julian to look at him. "I hated Elian. I hated being Alaric. Every time I had to hurt you for a scene, it tore me apart. The only thing that got me through was the promise that when it was over, I could have you. Just you." "Julian." The revelation struck Julian like a physical blow. The air left his lungs. You. But you never said. I was waiting for the production to end, Cashin said, his voice dropping, rough with emotion. I couldn't risk the contract, the studio interference. I needed us to be free of the roles before I told you. But you didn't give me the chance. You ran. Julian slumped against the wall, the fight draining out of him. I thought I was just a character to you. I was scared I'd lose myself completely. And now? Cashin asked, his thumb tracing the line of Julian's jaw, a touch so tender it hurt. Who are you now? I'm tired of running, Julian whispered. Cashin leaned in, his forehead resting against Julian's. Then stop. Take the role. Not because you need the money, though I'll pay you whatever you want, but because we need to rewrite the ending. We left it on a tragedy. I want to write a different genre. Is that why you wrote this script? Julian asked softly. To trap me. I would have torn down the sky to find you, Cashin admitted. But I knew you well enough to know that if I chased you, you'd only run faster. I had to wait until you were ready to come back to the light. I had to wait until you needed the art again. There was a silence, heavy and pregnant with possibilities. The tension shifted from fear to something else, something magnetic, undeniable. The forbidden tie that Julian had tried to sever was actually a red thread, knotted tight around his ankle, leading him inevitably back to this man. There's a plot hole in your plan, Julian murmured, his hands hesitantly coming up to rest on Cashin's chest. He could feel the heavy thud of the superstar's heart. Oh, Cashin raised an eyebrow, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. And what is that? If I take the role, Julian said, looking up through his lashes, Silas eventually betrays Adrian. It's in the character profile. Then we'll change the script, Cashin said, and close the distance between them. The kiss was not like the staged kisses in The Crown of Thorns. Those had been violent, performative, designed for the camera angles. This was desperate, hungry, a collision of 3 years of starvation. Cashin kissed him as if he were drinking water after crossing a desert, consuming Julian's breath, his sighs, his very essence. Julian melted into it, his fingers curling into the lapels of Cashin's expensive suit, anchoring himself. For a long time, the only sounds in the room were the rustle of fabric and the wet, heated sounds of their mouths moving together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, lips swollen and red. You're staying, Cashin stated. It wasn't a question. I'm staying, Julian agreed. Good. Cashin straightened his tie, though his eyes remained fixed on Julian's lips. Rehearsals start tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late. And tonight? Julian asked, emboldened by the heat still radiating between them. Cashin paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He looked back, and for the first time in 3 years, Julian saw a genuine smile break the stoic mask of the movie star. Tonight, Cashin said, we work on the chemistry. My place. The script is optional. The filming of The Shadows Trace, the noir thriller Cashin had written, became the most talked about production in the industry. The tabloids couldn't get enough of the explosive return of Julian Vane, nor the undeniable magnetism between him and Cashin Riker. Rumors flew about their past, about the method acting that seemed too real, about the nights Julian was seen entering Cashin's penthouse and not leaving until dawn. But on set, the dynamic had shifted. Julian was no longer the submissive prince. He was the equal, the challenge. One afternoon, 3 weeks into filming, they were shooting the pivotal interrogation scene. The set was a dreary, concrete room with a single flickering bulb. The script called for Adrian to handcuff Silas to the table and demand the location of the stolen diamonds. Action, the director called. Cashin slammed the file onto the metal table. Where are they, Silas? Don't play games with me. Julian leaned back in the chair, lifting his wrists. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut. He looked at Cashin, a smirk playing on his lips. I told you, Adrian. I don't have them. You're lying. Cashin growled, leaning over the table. I know when you're lying. Your pulse jumps. Your pupils dilate. Maybe that's not because I'm lying, Julian improvised, diverging from the script. Maybe it's because you're too close. The director didn't yell cut. The crew held their breath. Cashin froze, his character wavering for a split second. Is that so? You tell me, Julian challenged. You're the detective. Solve the mystery. Do I want to escape? Or do I want you to keep me here? It was a dangerous game. They were filming, yet they were speaking in code, airing their private dynamic for the world to see, hidden in plain sight. Cashin grabbed the chain of the handcuffs, yanking Julian forward until their faces were inches apart. The camera zoomed in, capturing the raw intensity. "If I keep you here," Cashin whispered, his voice dark and promising, "you never leave." "Not again." "Understood. Understood," Julian breathed. "Cut." "Perfect," the director shouted, ecstatic. "That was gold. Print it." The crew burst into applause, moving to reset the lights. But Cashin didn't let go of the chain. He stood there, blocking Julian from the view of the others, his gaze intense. "You went off script," Cashin murmured, reaching into his pocket for the key to the cuffs. "It felt right," Julian replied, rubbing his wrist as the cuffs clicked open. "It was risky. I thought you liked risks." Cashin caught Julian's hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss the red mark left by the metal. "Only the ones where I win." However, the industry was not kind to secrets. As the premiere approached, the pressure mounted. A rival agency, bitter about losing Cashin to his own production company, leaked the story. The Lost Years, how Julian Vane ran away from a forbidden love affair. It painted Julian as unstable and Cashin as a predatory manipulator. The scandal broke the night before the premiere. Julian sat in Cashin's living room, watching the news feed scroll by on his phone, his face pale. "They're destroying us," Julian whispered. "They're twisting everything. They say I was a victim, that you used your power to coerce me." Cashin took the phone from his hand and tossed it onto the sofa. He poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey and handed one to Julian. "Let them talk." "But your reputation?" "My reputation is built on being untouchable," Cashin said calmly. "And yours is built on being enigmatic." "This is just noise, Julian." "It's not just noise if they blacklist us," Julian argued, standing up and pacing. "I ran away once to stop this from happening. To stop you from being dragged down by me." Cashin set his glass down with a sharp clink. "Is that really why you ran? To protect me?" Julian stopped. "Yes. And to protect myself." "Then protect us now," Cashin said, walking over to him. "By standing next to me. Tomorrow night, on the red carpet. No hiding. No method acting. Just us." "They'll eat us alive," Julian warned. "Let them try," Cashin smirked, a wolfish, confident expression that made Julian's knees weak. "I've spent the last year buying shares in the major distribution networks. I don't just act in the movies anymore, Julian. I own the theaters they play in. No one blacklists us unless I say so." Julian stared at him. The sheer audacity, the calculated power move. It was terrifying and incredibly arousing. You bought the networks." "I told you," Cashin said, pulling Julian into his arms. "I spent 3 years ensuring that when I found you, nothing could take you away again. Not a contract, not a scandal, and certainly not the court of public opinion." Julian rested his head against Cashin's shoulder, finally letting the tension of the last 3 years bleed out of him. He realized then that he hadn't been the only one playing a role. He had played the victim, the runner. Cashin had played the king, the conqueror. But underneath, they were just 2 men who had found their match in the chaos of make-believe. "So," Julian whispered, "what's the plan for tomorrow?" "We walk the carpet," Cashin said. "We smile. And when they ask if the chemistry in the movie is real, I'm going to kiss you. On live television. On every screen in the world." The next night, the flashbulbs were blinding. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Julian stepped out of the limousine, his heart pounding. He felt a moment of vertigo, the urge to run resurfacing. Then, a warm, firm hand took his. He looked up. Cashin was there, looking devastating in a black velvet tuxedo. He squeezed Julian's hand, a silent anchor in the storm. "Ready?" Cashin mouthed. Julian took a deep breath. He looked at the cameras, then at the man who had chased him across time and memory. He realized he wasn't afraid anymore. The script was theirs to write now. "Ready," Julian said. They walked forward together, into the blinding lights. And when the reporters shouted their questions, demanding to know the truth about the forbidden tie, Cashin didn't answer with words. He turned to Julian, cupped his face, and delivered on his promise. It was the kiss that broke the internet. It was the kiss that ended the rumors and started a legend. But for Julian, amidst the screaming fans and the flashing lights, it was simply a homecoming. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian finally stop running and accept his place, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who manipulated the entire industry just to ensure you couldn't escape him again? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,